morning and welcome to the second half of the breakfast meeting. I am Mordecai Mulisa and I continue saying thank you so much for keeping your eyes on NBS. And now we are going to be discussing the rights and freedoms of people. And I'll start with telling you of what happened on 10th December 1948 in Charlotte, Paris, that is in France, when a document was adopted, and that is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that enshrines the freedoms of people. Of you and I, and that's why we're going to be discussing. For many of you that have been following the news, you've seen on a couple of incidents where retired Dr. Kano Chiza Besigye, former FDC president, Bobby Wine or Robert Chagulanyi Sentamu, MP of Chadondo East, have been stopped from accessing media houses, or even they're pulled out forcefully out of the media houses. And we always wonder, what does this have to do with the freedom of expression? I'll tell you about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19, and I'll read to you what it says. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media, and regardless of the frontiers. And the question is, how has it been in our country, Uganda? With me in the studio, it is the distinguished lawyer, Nicholas Opiyo. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mordecai. Your French is very good. Thank you for having me.
When I said Charlotte, it's my pleasure. Well, when I talk about what we've been seeing, I gave examples of Bobby Wine and Chiza Besigye being pulled out, and others actually not allowed to appear on some media houses. When we talk about the rights of, the freedom of expression, everyone has it. How is the impact of such actions in the editorial independence of the media houses in Uganda?
Well, first of all, largely the media space is run as a business. There are people who have invested their money and resources in providing the service as a platform for exchange of ideas, as a platform for entertainment, but also as a platform for professional journalists like yourself to exercise their exercise their trade. And so the actions of the state in attacking media houses, in preventing people from appearing on radio stations, on TV stations, actions of requiring journalists or media houses to send the names of their guests in advance of shows, first of all, undermine the fundamental principles of the independence of the press as a platform for imparting, receiving ideas, but it also impacts on the bottom line for media owners, because some people are popular. When they come onto your show, you have large viewership, and to deny them that viewership is to deny them the money they would have got, the viewership they would have got. Some of them pay for these shows. So if people pay for the shows and you pull them out, what in fact you're doing is making the media house liable for a cost.
For sure.
They have to refund, they have legal issues that are involved. But over and above this, in an electoral period such as this one, elections are based on the competition of ideas. The overall concept of candidates campaigning is for them to be able to tell people what they stand for. To deny other people a chance to speak on a media house is to abuse their rights, but deny the voters a chance to hear from them. And I think for me, it undermines our democracy, and in the end, casts a shadow of legitimacy over the result of the election.
Is that basis for police actions to stop people from accessing the media house? Of course, you said no, but this continues to happen. What can we do to stop this?
I think the time is now right for us to be able to hold individual police officers accountable for violations of rights, including the freedom of expression. Because the high-handed actions of the Uganda police force in many instances has led to loss of life, has led to indiscriminate abuse of human rights. But secondly, we must change the mentality of the police force. The police has a duty to maintain law and order. If people are gathering in a place and they suspect that somebody is causing a problem, they have a duty to remove that person causing a problem, not to disperse everybody else in the surrounding, not to indiscriminately fire tear gas, that will impact people miles away from that incident. So we must change the mentality that the police must allow people to exercise their rights and only remove from a crowd those who are causing problems. I think when we change that mentality, we will then be facilitating the free exchange of ideas and allowing people who are peaceful, who are lawful, to exercise their rights. But I think over and above, we must hold people accountable because the police has no right to implement unlawful orders. Any police officer who implements unlawful orders, who pulls a candidate or an individual from a TV station, ought to be held to account as an individual for their actions.
Let's talk about what has been said over and over again, the minimum broadcasting standards. In October 2019, UCC took action on several media houses for covering a procession by Bobi Wine and his violent arrest. According to the Uganda Communications Commission, they said that the media houses were airing extremist and violent content that would incite violence. The question is, what would be your take on this?
First of all, we must have clarity on what those minimum broadcasting standards are. So many times, these standards have shifted. One media house can do this, and the other is being stopped, allegedly for violating the minimum broadcasting standards. Let's have clarity. I know that the lawyers of KCC of UCC have argued that the UCC Act is very clear on what is minimum broadcasting standards. But I think in practice, these standards continue to shift. They're a moving target, making it impossible for media houses to even know exactly what the standards are. So I think there's need for consistency, there's need for a proper outline of, in very clear terms, what amounts to minimum broadcasting standards. Oftentimes, what has amounted to violations of those standards have been media houses reporting factual information, reporting about a demonstration, reporting about perhaps a riot. And because that makes the state look bad, or because that demonstration or riot is being led or championed by somebody seen as an opposition leader, a media house is then faulted for carrying live that broadcast. I think that should not be the objective of minimum broadcasting standards. The minimum broadcasting standards are hotly contested, and I think unless and until UCC clarifies and makes it very clear and succinct, but also adopts a uniform application of these guidelines, the suspicion of them acting against the law and acting in a partisan manner will continue. I hope and pray that the new leadership at UCC will have a major departure from the practice of the old leadership that had long been challenged and discredited.
Well, we are in what could be defined as hard times, and these are election times. I remember talking to my mom and telling me that, you know, you are in hard times. I don't know how you're going to do this covering the election. And the question of my mom is the question of other people, and specifically now to the media houses. How can they cover the 2021 elections without what has been defined as inciting violence or airing extremist content?
Look, let me say this, that NBS has done extremely well in the coverage of the election that they have done, both in terms of content, but also in terms of just the way it's delivered. So kudos to you for doing a good job.
Thank you.
I think that other media houses have to learn from you to see what you have done in covering this election. But a few things have to be said, that media houses must not cover elections in fear, as long as the information being covered is factual. Media houses are the mirrors that reflect who we are. If there is violence, report it. If there is a peaceful demonstration, report it. I think that your fidelity as a media house has to be to the facts, but not to pander to the interest of the actors, whatever side they belong to. Secondly, I think that the National Association of Broadcasters, that thankfully is chaired by the CEO of Next Media, must be proactive in engaging with the state and demonstrating that actions of the state undermine the business interests of the media owners. More importantly, undermine the practice of the profession of the dedicated, selfless men and women, boys and girls who work in these media houses, who have to travel long distances to bring us news, have to confront dangers, be in between clashes to bring us news, and they have a duty to protect them. And I think the National Association of Broadcasters must make that point very clear to UCC, but also make it very clear to government, so that you protect the men and women who work in these media houses, who cover these stories, because these are professionals. Thirdly, I think that media houses must focus on the big picture and show the impact of turning off the lights, because pulling somebody out of a radio station or of a TV station is turning off the lights. People who do so with the intention of perpetuating violence, of perpetuating unlawful activities. We would never be in this situation where a former Minister for Justice or Attorney General is in detention, but for the work of the media. Both citizen journalists, but also the dedicated men and women who focus the camera on his actions. We'd never be in this state if the media had not had the bravery to cover those stories. I think you need to continue to do so without fear or favor.
Well, I've been lucky to be one of the journalists that covered the NRM. They just concluded NRM primaries. And I'll tell you, in many places across the country, they were mad with violence and violation of human rights. And there is a feeling and a sense that this could happen regarding the 2021 general elections. With what you saw from the NRM primaries, what can we do to see that what we saw does not happen again? I mean, I tweeted something. I saw a tweet from, Don Wanyama saying, and was actually tweeting about me, saying that, what you saw is just normal. It usually happens. But what he calls normal resulted into losing of lives of some people. So what can we do to see that this doesn't happen again?
Of course, Don's work is to sanitize an otherwise bad election. Let's all admit NRM primaries was marred with extreme disregard for human life and really the rule of law, because people have been killed. People have used guns, beaten others. That election is not a model election. And I think Don and his group have to be candid about it, that election is not the election we expect from the NRM. But that notwithstanding, what the media has to continue doing is to report these cases, but not to give in to the sanitized official narrative that spokespersons of these parties give you. We have to focus behind the scene, because if you don't expose this, it's going to be worse, because I shudder to imagine if the NRM can do this to themselves, what they could do to those who disagree with them, the opposition. And so if we expose these actions, if we continue to show that in Ntungamo, in the president's backyard, where his wife comes from, is a situation where there's violence, if we continue to expose that in Chiruhura, in Museveni's own district, elections are marred with violence, maybe he will take action and make sure that he puts the house to order. This morning he sent out a tweet, a very stern tweet, that people are going to have to pay for their actions. I hope he follows through. He was able to do this because the media exposed it. So I think the media has to continue exposing these actions without fear or favor. The second thing I think that media houses have to do is that, because when we say 6 people are killed, it sounds like statistics. There's a human interest story there. There's a person whose father was killed. There's a son whose mother was killed, who may not be able to go to school. Let's show the human interest or the human impact of these callous actions we are witnessing. If we do that, we will be able to perhaps raise the conscience of the people so that they can reject violence in our election.
Let's talk about social media shutdowns. You recently co-authored a report on the impact of social media shutdowns in the context of protest mobilization and critical expression. Looking back at what happened in the 2016, there was social media shutdown. What would you take? What would be your take regarding, as we head for 2021 elections? Because there is a feeling, and in many Ugandans who are thinking that this might happen again. What could be the impact?
The report you mentioned is a joint study by Jan Risdak from the Stanford University and Moses Karanja, a Kenyan based in Canada, that we took a broad look at the impact of shutdowns on the African continent. What is certainly clear is that shutdowns do not serve any purpose except escalating violence in cases where they have been applied. We've looked at Uganda, looked at Cameroon, looked at other countries that shutdowns do not have any meaningful impact. The only impact they have is escalate violence and drive violence underground that will implode much later. I think that what we need to do is to begin to move away from the practice of shutdowns, the practice of social media suppression through taxes, through filtering, and through other legal means, such as the prosecution of people who use social media. We need to move away from that and begin to emphasize the positive impact of social media. In many countries, people have used social media to good effect. And I think that in the context of Uganda, if we deal with the question of disinformation and misinformation, we can be able to use social media to meaningful impact, especially in elections. Social media has already had huge impacts in the socio-economic lives of people. It has empowered many people to have a voice, regardless of what voice they are propagating. We must encourage the responsible use of social media by dealing with questions of disinformation. Now, you deal with disinformation not by shutdowns, not by prosecution. You deal with disinformation by simply, one, understanding the ecosystem of social media. If you do that, then you're able to use settings, you're able to use red flags to mark information as fake and stuff like that. But secondly, and more importantly, we have to begin to promote and use good content. And the work that, for example, media houses have done, that news is not just on your set in the evening. Your news is also on social media. So trusted media sources become our places of information to go on social media. So I think that we must remove the tax on social media and allow for people to access social media, because over and above the bad things we see, it has significant effect on our economic development, on freedoms of expression across the country. Secondly, we must encourage responsible use of media spaces by established media houses so that they become a point of reference for all sorts of information on social media. Regulation does not necessarily ensure obedience. What actually does ensure obedience is a change of culture. And we can change this culture if we begin to use social media positively and engaging people on it. I like the way that President Museveni lately has been engaging on social media. Let's use that space as a space for engagement. Invite everybody to come in there and let's engage.
Well, as we get to the conclusion, regarding when you look at what happened in the NRM primaries, we're headed for virtual campaignings, and the discussion of the possibility of postponing an elections was thrown in the bin. Do you think Uganda is ready for the elections coming next year?
We have to make a decision whether COVID is a danger. If COVID is a danger, then we can't hold elections in that condition. Seeing what has happened in the NRM elections, that elections, you cannot observe minimum standards or SOPs that were given by the ministry. It's just impossible. The passion that is involved, it's impossible. So if COVID is in fact as such a huge danger as we say it is, then we have to act responsibly, in my view, not to risk the lives of Ugandans. Because to have elections during COVID, when COVID is such a huge danger, is to do two things. One is to endanger people's lives, but also two, to hold elections that do not meet standards of a free and fair election. So if COVID is a problem, and government is the one that has statistics of those who are infected, and they see what's happening, we have to take the responsible decision to postpone the elections and allow for a vaccine to be obtained, to allow for perhaps a natural progression of this pandemic to a level where it's no longer such a danger, that human life now begins to deal with it, body immunity, or what is called herd immunity. And so the question is, do we have the guts to do so? If we did, we could actually postpone this election. And the law, interestingly, provides for it. The framers of our constitution envisage a time in which we could not hold elections as provided for in the Constitution for one reason or another. And public health emergencies is one of them. If COVID is a public health emergency as declared by the World Health Organization, we can't postpone the election. Postponing the election would mean that elected leaders will have they will hold on to their office from top to bottom for at least 3 months or 90 days. It would also require that the response to the pandemic is a response that's not only centered on the president, but that Parliament is involved and that everybody is involved in holding them to account, and that there will be a regular review of whether we should continue with an emergency or not. So I think the responsible thing to do is to postpone the election, if COVID is indeed a bad thing, as we said.
And you know, when you say if COVID, I had a discussion with a couple of people. I was in the eastern Uganda, and you could hardly see these people putting on masks, and raises questions whether they do really believe we have COVID. But according to what has been portrayed from the Minister of Health, and of course the entire globe, I would probably
we do have COVID. There's no doubt about it.
There's no doubt about
what
that.
What has happened in the country is that the government lost people's confidence. They use COVID to engage in massive corruption. They use COVID for politicking. For God's sake, the Minister of Health should be focusing on COVID, but she's now divided between COVID and election she has to win. I think we must restore public confidence in government interventions. We said we were giving food to people. We supplied rotten food. We didn't give everybody food. We forced people to choose between livelihoods and life because people have no food. So I think we have to go back to the drawing board. COVID is a real imminent danger, no doubt. People are dying. Take this seriously. Senior government officials, they found their son Kasinje is recovering from COVID. Senior media personalities have contracted COVID. It's a serious thing. But the government has not been acting responsibly, and that's why you go to upcountry places. People need to get food. People need to eat, and people will disregard government SOPs because they have to find a living. I
will conclude with hinting about the Article 20 from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that talks about everyone has a right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. This has been interrupted on a number of occasions by the police, stopping political parties from having their own organized kind of stuff to do. As we head for 2021 elections, and the questions continue, you know, this has been happening before the COVID times where there would be concerns of certain operating procedures. Now here we are heading to the election with COVID amidst us. What does this inform us, and how can everything be done so that the government is not one to blame, neither the people?
We have to make a choice, as I said, whether to have a free and fair, credible election or to have a sham election in a COVID time, in a time in which an opposition candidate holding a meeting of 50 people in Chireka would be dispersed, while an NRM candidate holding a procession of thousands of people will be allowed to go on. So we have to make a critical decision now. But secondly, and more importantly, you have to look at the decision of the Constitutional Court nullifying the Public Order Management Act, Section 8 in particular. The court was very clear that peaceful demonstrations are not synonymous to riots, and that they always degenerate into a riot because the authorities come battle ready. They come dressed as if they're going to a war, and their actions then escalate these would-be peaceful demonstrations into riots. So the problem largely lies with how the authorities deal with peaceful demonstrations. Peaceful demonstrations have absolutely nothing to do with riots. And I think that people think that citizens must only be involved in their governance during elections. So once you vote, you lock up your votes and you write and go home. No. A democracy works in a way that elections are only one, but in many ways of expressing oneself. You must be allowed to peacefully demonstrate, to petition the state, to engage leaders in the term of their office. And if you recognize peaceful demonstration as an important component of accountability, an important component of our democracy, then we'll have a good country, a peaceful country. We must proceed from the assumption that Mordecai is going on the streets. He means well. He's a lawful citizen. He's peaceful. He's unarmed. He's doing so because he wants to be heard. But if you take him as somebody who has to be controlled, then you are, in essence, making that right a discretion. We must move away from that practice and allow people to peacefully demonstrate. And we've seen this in primary elections of the different parties. If you suppress people, at some point they're going to blow up. They're going to blow up, and it's going to be nasty.
Wonderful. Well, we're getting to the top of the show. What would be your concluding remarks?
The freedom of expression is a fundamental right. It is a fundamental component of a democracy, because a democracy works on the principle of competition of ideas. Let ideas flourish. Let people make decisions based on proper information. They can access candidates. They can ask those candidates questions. Let the media be that platform for communication. Suppressing the media undermines our democratic development and undermines the quality of our election.
Thank you so much, Nicholas Opiyo, for paying a courtesy call to us.
Thank you, Mordecai.
We just cannot go beyond this, but just like he said, freedom of expression is a fundamental right. From Kampala to Washington to New Delhi, cross down to all other countries across this entire world. I just want to request you to be part of this move that will actually ensure that the rights of every person are respected here and abroad. My name is Mordecai Mlisa, and I wish you a blessed morning.